Okay, so here we are, part 3. We've talked about active versus passive, being an active player regardless of your play style. We've talked about understanding the flow of the dice and how this one thing, if you take anything away from these vlogs, manipulating the dice and understanding the dice flow, hard dice and soft dice, is so critical. But now we're going to implement that in list building. So every wargaming system has some sort of point value or a mission where you and I are going to select various units. And it might be historical. It could be sci-fi. It could be the narrative of whatever ships that you and I are playing. But we're going to have some sort of choices. Now, part of this is going to be, of course, reflected in the type of army that you want to play and the type of game that you want to play. And while I consider myself a competitive wargamer and I want to win, I also recognize, and win in a good way, not at the expense of my opponent. I want both of us to have a good time. And I'm going to do my best to win. And if I lose, it's going to be a tough fight. I'm not going down easy. That's what I'm going to give you out of respect as a player. And in building a list, I firmly agree that you should always play the units and the models that you want to play. This awesome hobby of wargaming, of board gaming, it's a social aspect. We're going to be spending a lot of time having a lot of fun. Play what you want to play. But mesh it up with good tactics. And that's what we're building up here with the list. So the first thing is to connect with your play style, connect with active and passive, connect with the dice flow, and figure out what kind of army do you want to play? What kind of list? What kind of fleet? What do you want to command? And look and build this based on a plan of action. Select units and have a plan for each unit. Then as you modify it, are you going to build a specialized list? Now we're talking two extremes here. Are you going to build what I classify as a specialized list or a generalist type list? Here's an example of a specialized list. And we're talking kind of generic systems. Again, you're going to bolt it into the game that you enjoy playing. A specialized list is going to look and say, I have access to heavy armor. I have access to heavy tanks, a lot of guns. They're slow. They're ponderous. I don't have a lot of maneuverability, so I have to be positive. I have to be very definitive of where I'm going to go. But if my opponent doesn't have any anti-tank weaponry, there's no way they're going to be able to stop me. So my plan, I'm going to specialize. I'm going to take all my points, all my resources, all my units, and pile it into these tanks. Whatever the options are in my army list, I'm going to specialize in one point, and I'm going to use that against my opponent. It's like a giant hammer, Thor's hammer, to crush down on them. Now, the problem with a specialized list is if your opponent happens to have a hard counter to it, you're going to go down pretty fast. You're going to go down pretty hard. So in bringing this tank list, this heavy armor, I love tanks, against my opponent, well, if the mission means they're well dug in and they happen to have some advanced infantry with anti-tank weaponry, it's going to be a pretty short game, and I don't really have that many options. But a specialized list looks to tailor and build to the absolute extreme. And this could be maybe you take your firepower capabilities to the extreme, where you try to alpha strike someone. Shooting, I just try to decimate you turn one, and shooting, I break your army in one turn. Maybe it's a fast list. I'm so fast, I have mobility, you'll never catch me. Pouring all my points into that. Maybe it's a close combat list, where I'm going to get into close combat and just devolve into that massive assault in there. On the opposite side, we have an all-comers list. And the idea behind this list is, based on your points and units, you have a little something. You have an answer for everything. So I have units that can deal with infantry. I have units that can deal with heavy armor. If I'm a ground force, I have some anti-aircraft or anti-space support. I've got some mobility. I've got some shooting. I've got some assault capability. And with this type of list, since you have a little bit of everything, what you're going to look at is, where is your opponent's list weak? So if I have some air support and I look at my opponent's list modified by the mission and I realize their anti-air is very weak, very, very weak. So if I focus other elements in my list, take out their air support. Now they have nothing to challenge my air support. And even though my air support is a small portion of my list, I'm going to be able to use that unopposed. If I realize, hey, they really don't have that much mobility, I'm going to take out what little mobility they have and then use my cavalry, use my fast bikes, use my fast armored personnel carriers, use my fast transports, my light mechs, whatever the system is. And I'm going to use that as an advantage. So you're looking at where they are weak, applying the other elements of your list to break that weakness. So since you have a little bit of everything, you can now dominate with that. And it's not always one thing. They might be weak in one or two areas. That's what you want to focus on. And then you have those two areas that your opponent can't counter with. So now we're going to move into part 4. Practice, putting this in theory. And we're going to pause here for a moment because now's the time to kind of look through your miniatures, look through your systems, and kind of take the knowledge of your rules and put them into active versus passive, flow of the dice, and list building, and come up with a plan. And then we're going to look at how to put that plan of training into action.